Hi, everyone. I'm Kristy Christie. I'm director of the Malaysian.com, and I also volunteer with IABC Asia Pacific region. It's the International Association of Business Communicators. We are a volunteer organization that focuses heavily on developing strategic communicators. For the Malaysian.com, let me pop over to my slides and tell you a bit about what I'll be speaking today. It is about leveraging technology to boost employee engagement. Now, coming off, I've just been listening to the panel. They were absolutely wonderful. Some really key insights came up, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to thread that back into today's presentation as well. I apologize, by the way, if you can hear the rain. I am in Malaysia and it's our monsoon season. So it's been heavy rain off and on today evening. Bear with me, but we'll get right into this. So quick introduction on about me. I am director of the Malaysian.com, which is a small cloud application development agency, as well as a web development agency. So what that means is that we help businesses, departments, and companies just automate processes within their various organizations to find a way to streamline things. But while it sounds very technical, our emphasis is to do it in a way where we put people first. So we achieve an organization's goals, but the people is really a key priority in what we do. If you have any questions, I know we have a very short amount of time today. Please do tweet me, join me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. I've learned so much from conferences that I'm happy to pay it forward and answer any questions you might have. If you're listening to this from a recording, please get in touch as well. Even if it's 6 months from now, still happy to answer and have conversations. So let's get right into it. I want to bring to you a little bit from the manufacturing industry. I'm sure everybody has heard about Industry 4.0 or the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and we might be wondering, what has this got to do with employee engagement? Why is this something that I'm bringing up now? First, I'll give a little brief on an example of what Industry 4.0 and employee engagement, will bring it in later, but what it has to do with this presentation is, an example really is Adidas, and they had this incredible moment a couple of years ago where the industry has shifted into what we call mass personalization or mass customization. Now, Adidas partnered with a 3D printing startup, and they wanted to market a new line of individual, very customized performance athletic footwear. And this wasn't just footwear that was necessarily, it was not mass produced in the sense of where you go to the shops and you just figure out which size fits you. No, this was something that was actually based on the wearer's height, your weight, the gait of your foot, the way you step. So the entire shoe was customized to the wearer. They came up with a very limited line of this customized shoes, but they were looking at eventually going in a couple of years to produce this in the thousands. And Adidas is not the only one. This is something that's happening all over the place. It's part of the reason why Industry 4.0, 3D printing, AI, automation, what all of this has to do with the manufacturing industry and how it's changing the entire expectations of consumers. And to bring it back to employee engagement and what that has to do with your employees is, there was an incredible, I think it was an article by Deloitte's Insights that talked about employees as consumers. And you and I both know that things are changing rapidly. The way that we used to be able to work when we worked in a company and how a company interacted with us has changed so drastically from what it was 10 years ago to what employees are expecting now. And these expectations and these demands really will just continue to shift and escalate just generation to generation. So what Industry 4.0 and employee engagement has to do with each other is personalization. That's the key. If there's one thing I can ask you to take away from today's talk about boosting employee engagement with technology, it's personalization. And this was even reflected even in the conversation that we had with the panel just now, where Jane Sparrow talked about how when people have one-on-one conversations, the main thing is they want to feel valued. And personalization is part of that as well. It's essentially people wanting information that is reflective of what their interests are, what their worries and their concerns are. And this is something now that goes slightly into marketing territory. The panel brought this up as well. You wouldn't launch a new product. I think it was Katie who mentioned you wouldn't launch a new product without market insights. And the same thing has to do with internal comms. Marketers all agree that personalization actually helps advance customer relationships. And if we look at our customers, our employees as our customers when we are working in internal comms, that really changes the way we might approach some things. Now, I know that all of us have various tools, intranets, and maybe other devices or platforms or channels that we're using. It doesn't necessarily mean that we always have to be extremely high tech, despite some of the tools that I'll be showing you today, which might look very high tech. I will bring it back to some of the basics because let's face it, we are in organizations where there are budget cuts, and sometimes coming up with a business case for a tool can take 3 to 6 months, maybe to a year, depending on how much you require of your organization. But the one thing I would ask that you take away today is personalization. So when we go into what does marketing now have to do with communication, we've seen overlaps, and I've heard people talk about how worrying it can be, that sometimes there's a lack of distinction between the two fields, or they are asking what is the value that comms can bring, because marketing, it's very sales oriented. So it's very easy to track their performance and benchmark that against on organizations' goals. But when you talk about the value of comms, it gets a bit more fuzzy. And part of that encroachment, as it can be sometimes perceived at, can be seen as almost something to be concerned about, something to be worried about. But actually, I see it as a huge opportunity, because coming from a web development and cloud application development background, I see how there are so many tools out there for marketing departments that can be actually adapted or used for employee engagement as well, or for internal comms, or for any other project that you might want to use. The question is whether we realize they exist and we understand how it is that we can customize them or adapt them to our needs. Now, I want to bring this quote to you, and it comes over regarding the integration. The integration of PR with marketing is pushing communicators to adopt tech used in the advertising world. This came out in the PR Tech Report from last year, 2019, the Global Communication Report. It's free to download. I would strongly suggest taking a look at it. I know things have changed, considering how much has changed over the past 12 months. But the report, a lot of it still remains incredibly relevant. And this integration is actually a good thing. It makes it easier to create smart goals, to make sure that whatever we're doing, we find ways of measuring it, benchmarking it, and then checking it against what it is that we were hoping to achieve. So as this is an example, right? There's a free tool by HubSpot, and now they generate persona cards that are very customizable and very easy to use. I've tested it out. I liked it. It was very detailed. And these persona cards, this is an example of a tool I would recommend trying to use if you haven't already done it. You know, we can do it the old school way, the old fashioned way, no problem. If you have a couple of minutes and you want to give it a go, just look this up, the persona cards of HubSpot, and give it a try. You'll be able to create the persona cards of the different categories or groups of employees that you have, because once you understand each employee deeply, you'll be able to personalize the different channels or the tools and the things that you use. And when people see personalized information, they're more likely to be engaged. I saw a question earlier in the chat. Somebody was saying that they post very interesting content on their intranet, and yet engagement with employees was low, and they're wondering, what can they do about it? Really, one of the questions is, I think it was answered by the panel, is that we have to understand what it is that employees want. Now, Sia mentioned this case study where I think it was about 100,000 employees were accessing a Facebook page to get the Q&A from the company directly. And this is clearly because this was something that was important to them. It was addressing information that they wanted right away, and it was an easy way to access. A very good example of a low-tech way, low-budget way of reaching these employees, but in a way where, because the content was relevant to them, they immediately wanted it. And that's what I would answer to the person who asked that question in chat, is really understand who your employees are and perhaps take a look and see what it is that they're looking for. If the information is engaging and interesting to you, there's a very good chance that if it's not being engaged with the employees of the target groups that you're displaying it to, then I would suggest rethinking on and having those questions. Just, I know it's a lot more difficult today. As they mentioned, informal discussions are really difficult now because everything is controlled by the diary, as they said. And if you're still able to find a way, whether you're in lockdown Melbourne, to just have a quick chat, sometimes I would suggest having a quick chat without video. People are zoomed out that it's almost a relief to get a call by WhatsApp or regular phone call. No video, no pressure. Have a quick chat. They can kick back, relax, and maybe, find out what it is from those influencers, if you can identify them, why these content that you're producing is not necessarily getting the kind of interest that you want. But to go on, how do we personalize things? Now, there are tools already out there. I'm going to show you an example, and this is a marketing tool by a company called Weebio. Now, Weebio is quite amazing as to what they do. This is a marketing tool where they actually change the content on a website to suit the person that's coming. And this information comes from various things like cookies and other marketing tracking tools that may have been inserted into online advertisement, because we've all seen the ad that just stalks you across the internet. And if it was a bag or a car or something else, and we see it as a sign maybe of something to purchase, but really it's all cookies and tools that are being used to track our movements. But it's trickier for the marketers because they're trying to address or target a group that is not necessarily familiar with the organization, and the organization may not be necessarily familiar with them. But in this case, the internal comms, you have such a variety to data. Sia, I think, mentioned this as well, data and insights, that there tends to be some information that you have available. For example, how many of your employees are parents, and whether they've got if, for example, there was a case study actually that was done and presented at the IABC World Conference that I found incredible by Daniel Munslow. He talked about how they would actually use pulse surveys on the intranet and measure how people were feeling. And based on what was happening, they would also decide whether a bulk of their employees who were parents were facing more stress than usual. And using that, they realized that at times they had to help support employees with, for example, materials that help with homeschooling. But this was during lockdown in that particular organization's country. And the information was so well received. It wasn't related directly to the organization, but it showed that the organization cared. Now, Weebio is very advanced. It actually changes things right on the website. So this is, if you have time to check out their website, go ahead and take a look at it. But what I would essentially say is that if we put this kind of personalization or thought into the content that we're producing for employees, the channel almost does not matter. They will find you. They will follow you. And although I'm going to present some of the tools today, this is why I keep re-emphasizing that personalization is really the key here. There's one thing you take away today, it's personalization. So here's what we have to do. We have to consider what we need to evaluate what our teams are spending time on. If they're spending time on the unnecessary, or there are things that that's burning them out without realizing it, we have to try and see what we can do to ease that burden. Because if you're in Zoom calls back to back all day and we post something on an intranet, there's a good chance it's not going to get that level of views that you're hoping for, to get the response that you need. So we need to understand what it is, whether we're making time for our employees. I think, as Katie said, we have our employees, but we do not own or we're not able to demand their attention. We don't own that. We have to earn it. So this is a good time to evaluate as well. What have we stopped that no one else has noticed? If there's things that you used to do in the past or that your team used to do in the past and was always highlighted as something critical or important, and now because priorities have changed and shifted so drastically, and no one has noticed that you have stopped using or doing this thing, this task, it's a good start at questioning whether it is as important as we thought it was, or if we always knew it wasn't important, but somebody was asking us to do it anyway, whether it is a good time to present this information, compiling it and presenting it to our senior management as a possible reason to discontinue it, and to ask questions: what failed, what could have worked better, to really still track, during this time, even though things have changed and things are in such a rapid flux. If there are things that we're doing that perhaps could have been done better, or that you saw potential for, there's something that was inexplicably successful beyond what you initially predicted. Is there a way that you can amplify that? So the marketers in your organization are a good source of inspiration. This is where I would say talk to them, find out what tools that they're using. How are they engaging customers? How are they building relationships? Because there's the tools that they're using and that they have already invested in, there's a very good chance some of that might be able to be adapted to the use of internal communicators. And if there are ways that we're reaching out regularly to customers, for example, or to make sure that the messages that we're sending them is very personalized, are there things that you can do, which, this is a cost-effective way. It helps, it'll be easier to build a business case for it because you've already seen the effectiveness in terms of your customers, and now being able to use that to justify your use of it with employees. It's a good benchmark. There's things that you can do, taking out from how the organization is using the tool to be able to present it to your bosses. So I would strongly say talk to the marketers, find out what's already being used. If you feel you may not have the budget to propose something else, or you just don't necessarily have time to test a variety of channels or tools and things that are already available out there, but you have one already sitting right on your doorstep. So here's an example of one of the things I really like. And this is a very standard basic tool that we use in online marketing. It's called a website heat map. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but what I'm wondering is how many people have thought of maybe considering implementing something like this on your intranet. Now, what it does is that it has these gradients of color. It's actually monitoring how many people come to that web page and how far down they scroll. So the part that's green and blue are sections where you've basically lost your visitor. They're not really going to those points. They're coming to the reds, they're coming to the yellows, and then they're no longer scrolling. If the panel said that on average we are scrolling through, I think it was 300 feet, was it, of social news, imagine on our intranets, especially the ones where it's like a news feed, it's to understand how far are scrolling before they no longer go further down. And this is something that's been really useful in even my business in the Malaysian.com. We've used it on our online sales page to find out, customers were not seeing this bottom part of the website and we had left some critical information there. And that's when we switched it around. So sometimes your landing page of your intranet might have information in a specific area that you thought might draw attention or was a good spot because that space is always available. But then you realize from the heat maps that nobody's clicking on it. That's the other that smaller picture there that you see that has like infrared colors almost. That's showing where people are clicking. And people naturally use their mouse to scroll through a website as they're reading it, even though they're not clicking. And that's the other thing it records, is mouse movements. I know this sounds a little stalkery. It's really, there's no personal information that's released. You don't see identifying information. So there's some anonymity to it. But it does let you tell how people are using standard tools and websites that you might be having where perhaps, it could be optimized better. The next thing is really recordings of how visitors are engaging with your website. And this is something you can do even with your intranet, or let's say you had a blog, a standard CEO blog where maybe messages are being posted for employees based on the different announcements that you might have. These recordings would actually show how people are interacting with the website, if they're clicking on something that isn't clickable. So it's so easy to make that mistake that you'd be surprised sometimes by the insights that a tool like this can give you. So check out, I think this was crazyegg.com, hotjar.com. There's a number of them out there. They're very reasonably priced. I think it's about 30 US. It starts from $30 a month. You can run it for a couple of months, and then when you're done with your analysis or recording, you can discontinue it. So very relatively low price to get an understanding of how your visitors are working with a platform that you've probably spent quite a bit of time, effort, and money on. The next thing, let me just go next, is this is actually showing you the recording. If you can see, it's showing how somebody's dragging things around and clicking around. That's an example of a screen recording. So be sure to check that out if that's something of interest to you. The next thing is actually Google Analytics for intranets. Now, we all know about Google Analytics. We know as well how in-depth it can be. The trouble is sometimes is that it can be so comprehensive that I personally don't always like going through it. Especially if I'm trying to dig out just a singular piece of information that is not your usual, what's the bounce rate or how often has somebody visited the site. If it's something slightly, just a little more different from my usual day-to-day statistics, it can get quite difficult, or just it ends up taking a lot of reading. So Banana Tag has a free template for intranets, and they've created this so that the graphics that you see on your Google Analytics dashboard is catering to information that they think you as an internal communicator would be interested in. This is free. You might need your IT guy to help with the installation. It might be a little tricky just because Google Analytics sometimes tends to be, but reach out to your IT guy, explain that you would like this embedded on your intranet, and hopefully it will just make your life a little easier when it comes to collecting statistics. And using the statistics, you'll be able to understand how to customize things to your audiences, or where it is that perhaps you might need to tweak something to boost that levels of employee engagement. Next up, we have the loyalty and net promoter score. So this is used all the time by marketers. And in some ways, we also definitely measure it in comms. I just had a conversation today with another IABC member who talked about how they use the NPS, the net promoter score, within their organization from a comms perspective. So Wootrick is an example of a tool that allows you to put this on the site. So they're able to do quick surveys, and whether it's in-app or mobile, it allows you to start collecting that data. And the data is critical to understanding first how engaged are people with your website, because then that would give you a justification or a reasoning on what actions or steps you might want to take. So the next step is, because I see we're already at 23 minutes in, I'm trying to make sure I stay on time here, is to make remote working less painful and more collaborative. Now, this is, I would say, one of the, it's just become one of the keys. It's when people are swamped with emails and messages on numerous platforms and different channels, and having to try and track all of that. Whilst you do want to offer that customization and making sure that you are engaging them in a tool or in a way that they would like to be engaged, it can get overwhelming even for you as an internal communicator, because you're trying to figure out which is the targeted way to do something that would really be helpful rather than hinder them from what you're trying to achieve. And here are some tools that might be able to just help enhance that collaborative process. So the first is actually a whiteboard, which I'm sure you all have tried different whiteboards. Miro is one of the good ones. There are quite a lot. I've got no real strong favorites. Miro just happens to give you this access to instant collaboration. Now, if you haven't already tried it out, sometimes a Zoom call can be just, it's not enough to see someone's face anymore. Sometimes it's a relief to be able to look at a whiteboard and draw on it together. So I would say that when it comes to enhancing your contact and your conversations and your meetings, definitely see whether bringing in this kind of digital whiteboards can be helpful. And it starts from zero. There's a trial version for 3 whiteboards, and they've got different tiered pricings. I'm sure you'll be able to find one, whether from this provider or anyone else that suits your budget and your number of users. So this is a good one. The next is really Otter.ai. I know you've been in countless number of Zoom conversations and calls and just team meetings and things like that, where someone's taking minutes, and just taking the minutes can be painful. A lot of times it falls on us. I know internal comms, sometimes you're working on with just 2 people, 2 women team, 1 man, 1 woman. But it can get painful. Otter AI is one of those tools that can just help make that process easier. It actually integrates with Zoom to be able to take notes for you, and it allows your Zoom participants to actually add notes to it. So they can add highlights, they can tell what's important. The meeting notes that it generates can just be, take it to the next level, really, so that even your Zoom calls are just a little more engaging, or really it's a little more memorable. How many times I've been in, just today alone, I think I've been in 2 or 3 Zoom calls, and I can't remember necessarily what has my day been like. It takes me a moment just to figure it out. But a tool like this would be incredibly helpful if this is, if your day is somewhat similar. All right, next up, we actually have gamification. I know. It can be, it's a word that's been around all the time. We've heard about it for maybe a couple of years now, and it's not necessarily very clear on how to implement it. There are tools that are also available, but this is a bit of a higher priced, higher budget type of scenario. So there was actually an example on how this was used on LinkedIn. When somebody completes their profile completely, you get the completion badge, or you do skills training, or you do recommendations, and they give you all these different badges. And because we think about it, people wanting to feel valued and recognized for their efforts, things like this can really help. And if it was integrated with your internal comms initiatives, completing something, for example, submitting a benefits form, or answering a survey, for example, gives those badges and those ways to recognize employees, especially in this remote day and age. It might be worth considering, depending on the budget. Because I'll give you an example. There is a company called Spinify that does this, but it is meant for larger projects, because it's starting at $4,000 a year. So not necessarily something I would absolutely recommend. Only if you have been keen to find out how you can use gamification in your own teams, you could check this out. By the way, I should mention I'm not affiliated with any of these companies, not Banana Tag, not HubSpot, not Miro, none of them, only the Malaysian.com and IABC Asia Pacific. So for employee engagement, recognition, and support, there's a lot of peer-to-peer apps that you should check on that allows your employees to cheer each other on, and it's public. People are recognizing what their colleagues are doing and praising them for it. And this sometimes can be it's small but immediately gratifying way just to know that the work you're doing is valued. Next up this is the report I was talking about. This is a quote from the Deloitte Insights. They talk about, let technology act as an indirect enabler for a wide range of experience organizations want to deliver to workers, to help address anxiety and other potentially adverse consequences of the virtual world, such as detachment and loneliness. So whilst this is not necessarily going to solve all your problems, the tools today, it will hopefully give you a start for how you can actually implement it just to enhance the works that you're doing, and the works that you're doing, sorry. So as I think it was Jane Sparrow who mentioned about the bonding and the managing one-on-ones, make sure that you're actively listening. And sometimes it can be tricky to know that you're doing that well. Check out websites like knowyourteam.com. They actually give you sample questions that you can, there are templates that you can use when you're conducting those one-on-ones to make sure it's customized to what the situation is, so that you are, getting to the goal. All right, you're almost done, almost on time. build a business case for it. So last tool I'm leaving you with, and this comes from the Office Vibe, also free. You can put in information. It's like a little calculator that will tell you where, if you could enhance productivity, here are the savings you could make. If you could reduce turnover, here are the savings you could use. And you could use these figures potentially as a rough draft of building a case. I would strongly recommend checking out some of the other presentations today. I did notice there were 2 that were coming up about building a business case. Go ahead and check that out, or check out the recording if you are unable to catch them. And these are some additional resources. The AI Playbook for Communication Professionals. This is actually from Sia Papagiorgio's company. She did an excellent job, and I really enjoyed this report, which is why I'm linking in it here. CIPR has a AI and PR panel that Sia actually recommended as well, and it's a great resource. So search for these things. If you can't find it, feel free to tweet me or LinkedIn message me, and I'll bring it up for you. But yeah, that is my presentation. I sped through it because I had 45 minutes. I was trying to fit this into 30. If you have any questions, I'm sorry I couldn't get to it. Please do tweet or message me. Thank you, everyone.